So welcome back to the show. I'm honored today to have Brian Carroll today as a guest. He's the author of Gift of Injury. And go ahead and if you can introduce yourself really quick, Brian, before we begin.
Sure. My name is Brian Carroll. I live in Jacksonville, Florida. I'm 38 years old. I've been powerlifting for the last 20 years. And through it all, I've learned a lot, written a couple books. One book's called 1020 Life. We're currently on the second edition with that. It was released February 2017. And then I co-authored the book Gift of Injury with Dr. Stuart Miguel, a world-renowned biomechanist and spine specialist. So, yeah, that's a little bit about me. And I still compete in powerlifting, and I help people all over the world with their training, with their technique, and with their backs. So I kind of do a lot of things these days.
Yeah, so for the listeners that don't know Brian, he had like an extremely traumatic lower back injury a while back. And I'll try to superimpose a picture of the MRI, the before and after. And
Okay.
honestly, it looked like one of your vertebrae had like a serious crack on it. Like some people, they have like a minor disc bulge or maybe like a disc herniation, but it literally looked like everything blew up in your lower back. And I wanted to talk to you today about kind of how you went on to recover from that very serious injury. And then on top of that, set more world records after that. So I think it's like a very inspiring story, especially today. Probably like 90+% of people are going to have an episode of serious like lower back problems within their lifetime. So you provide like an inspiring story. And I also ran into your story when I had my not as serious as yours, but in my opinion, pretty serious lower back injury as well. And it was demoralizing and debilitating. And it kind of took away the one thing I love to do, which is like lift weights and work out, So I felt like that was also like a huge hit to the morale. So if you can kind of begin and take over, just kind of give an introduction of how you sustained the injury, and we can kind of go from there.
Well, I believe that there's a couple different um, pit stops that contributed to the injury. One being a fall, and then other little things over time that I noticed where I had small injuries that would flare up. And it became cumulative to where I ended up having, basically no disc at L5S1, no disc at L4, L5. The sacrum, as you said, was basically split in half. And this was from too many micro movements under load, not having proper progressions of rest, and basically just moving poorly throughout the day, being a bigger guy. All of that kind of snowballed into one pretty colossal injury. And as you said, you nailed it. It's very demoralizing when you can't lift. Then you're constantly in pain. So it goes from not being able to lift in the gym pain free to not being able to do anything in life pain free. Then after a while, it seeps into your personal life, your business, everything just becomes dreadful because of that pain. And it greatly affects you mentally and physically and spiritually. So my purpose for this book was to show people that back injury is not a career ender. And I tell my story about what I went through, the mistakes I made, the things I learned, how I met with Dr. McGill, how we carved a path together. But it didn't start off as a happy story because when I met with Dr. McGill in May of 2013, after he did his assessment and looked at my MRs, he told me that I was done. I had nothing left in my back, but he could help get me out of pain. And so when he told me that, I looked at my wife, I looked at Dr. McGill and said, well, once you get me out of pain, I'm going to return to lifting. And we went back and forth a couple different times. And so finally he agreed when he saw that I wasn't going to budge. And he said, you get pain free, come back in 6 months and we'll talk about it. Who knows? Maybe you do get back to lifting, and maybe you're right. We end up writing a book about it. So I held him to that, and we wrote the book. A few years after my recovery, and subsequent titles after that, and I'm 100% pain and symptom free to this day. And we're almost at we're at 6.5 years since I first met with him, and there's some keys to that which we'll discuss as to why I'm pain free. But that's a little bit of the background for you.
Yeah, so where you said it was like a cumulative process that led to that injury, but there like one specific moment that definitely kind of set it over the edge and uh, kind of made it noticeable that okay, like now I'm
Yeah.
very seriously injured.
Yeah, 2009, I fell on an obstacle course when I was going to be a police officer. And then it got better after a little bit. I landed right on my butt when I was running full speed. And so that flared me up pretty good for a while. And then in 2011, when I squatted 1185 for the all-time world record at 275, I felt my back get a little bit loose under load there, and I felt some pain. It shot down into my leg a bit. And then from there, it regressed, competing too much, not moving properly, not having proper time to heal. And then next thing you know, 2013, it gotten so bad where I was looking at getting a spinal fusion. I was doing the typical injections, the physical therapy, the stretching, all the wrong things you shouldn't be doing, but I didn't know better. So another reason for our book is to put good information out there that people have to sort through right now, currently defined. We want it out there in front and center.
Yeah, and can you go over kind of like the frustration of going to like physical therapists or chiropractors that don't address, like, for instance, the etiology of the specific problem? Because I had that problem as well, and that was like very frustrating. And especially looking online is like the worst thing you can do for the most part, you know? So can you kind of
Yes.
talk about the process of kind of having to weed through that and your experience with that? Because I'm pretty sure a lot of people can relate and are going to relate to that when they if they do have that back injury.
It's extremely frustrating going to people that have 8-year degrees and doctorates, whether it be chiropractic or now physical therapists have a doctorate to get their PT. But a lot of them don't know about the back, and it's very surprising. They don't know about how to avoid the pain generators and create stability if there's instability there, and building a pain-free program. They just, I don't know. It's very disheartening when I have people that come to see me and they've been seeing professionals or so-called professionals while they have a disc bulge and they're flexion intolerant, and the doctor is trying to get them to gain more lumbar range of motion to touch their toes as part of the therapy. And as soon as I get them to stop doing that, then they recover. So I went through some of that too. I got some bad advice along the way. Luckily, I did have some good chiropractors in my corner that helped me and reiterated the fact that I needed to go see Dr. McGill. But yeah, the American medicine of seeing a general practitioner that doesn't know anything about back injury, they'll give you medicine, they'll push you forward to do physical therapy. Physical therapy doesn't work. Then you go to the pain management doctor to get pills or shots, and then from there they refer you to a surgeon. And what do surgeons do? They do surgery. They don't rehab people. So once you've been pushed that far to a surgeon, that's your option, surgery. So unfortunately, a lot of people get surgery that's unnecessary. And I don't know about you, but I don't know too many people who have only had one back surgery.
Yeah, exactly. It's one of those things that once you start going down that path, it's kind of like you're stuck in it for the rest of your life. And I was
Yep.
also surprised, like through my experience, I don't know if you had this as well, like not like one physical therapist I went to actually did an assessment on how I would squat or how I would deadlift, even like
Right.
those basic things, or even how I would, sit in a chair. They do like, of course, like a movement screen, but that's not really like representative of kind of how you're moving around throughout the day, how you're sitting, how you're even sitting when you're going to the bathroom, or watching TV or deadlifting or squatting, et cetera, et
Yeah.
cetera.
Yeah,
I
they
don't know
should
what your
find
opinion.
out what causes you pain and how to move around it and build more capacity. But again, the way the model's set up is they don't have 3 hours to do an assessment with you. Neither do doctors. Doctors see you for 10 minutes maybe. And yeah, so unfortunately that's frustrating, but there is good information thanks to people like Dr. McGill where you can buy the book Back Mechanic and basically assess yourself. And I know so many people have used it and fixed themselves without seeing anybody. So that's an option too. But just be careful who you go to see. Just because they have a PhD next to their name or a doctor doesn't mean that they're going to be the best person to help you. And you got to surround yourself with professionals, not junior folk clinicians.
And what was kind of like your level of pain and discomfort when you're kind of already seeing these practitioners and everything? Like, were you at least able to walk, or did you even have trouble like laying down, for instance?
I would get bad flare ups. I averaged probably a 6 to an 8. It would flare up to an 8 or a 9 sometimes. Most of the time, it was just nagging, irritating, discomforting pain. And then I continued to lift heavy, obviously, and I wasn't moving in a way that was going to help heal it when I wasn't in the gym. So you got 168 hours in a week. I might have trained 20 hours a week. So the other 148 hours, what was I doing? I was picking the scab and I wasn't letting it heal up. So it just got worse and worse. So By the time I went to see Stu in 2013, it was all the way ramped up, and I was just losing capacity like crazy. So it was at its worst when I was seeing Stu for sure. And the shots worked for 2 or 3 weeks, and then it just got worse because I was treating the symptoms and not the cause.
And when you said you're kind of picking at the scabs in terms of your daily life, can you kind of give a few examples for the listener of what you mean by that in terms of like, bad movement patterns?
To receive a proper assessment, you have to know what the pain generators are and the pain causes. So if you don't remove those causes, you're going to continue picking that scab. And an example of picking the scab would be if someone's flexion intolerant and they're given exercises to stretch and create more range of motion in that area. It's going to feel good for a little while. It's like picking a scab on your hand, but it's never going to heal up. You're going to itch it a little bit. You're going to pick it. It's going to stay irritated. It's never going to heal up. So I would move in a way. I was flexion intolerant. I would bend the way I'd put on my shoes, the way I'd grab dog food, the way I'd pick something up. It was constantly picking that scab, and I was never moving around that injury and just letting it heal. Just simply not picking it and just letting it heal. And I never did that. And so many people do that either purposely by being given bad information or accidentally by just moving and not thinking that the cumulative movement is going to either help you or hurt you. And unfortunately, if you're not educated, it's going to hurt you most times.
Gotcha. So what was like, around what time did you finally decide that kind of like the local people in your network in terms of the chiropractors and physical therapists or medical doctors weren't able to help you, and then you kind of wanted to seek out the advice of Dr. Stuart Miguel? Like, how did you even end up running into him to begin with?
Well, I had a client that knew I was going through back problems. He was one of my powerlifting clients, and he was from Canada and suggested I go see Dr. McGill. And then a couple other Canadian friends of mine chimed in and said that, man, he's the man. So I researched him a bit, read some of his books, got an idea of what I needed to be doing, ultimate back fitness and performance. Excuse me. And then I sought him out and sent him an email. And Stu's so busy that unless you're, a very important athlete or something, it'll get through to him sometimes. But my injury happened to be so heinous that it got his attention. So luckily that was on my side. I reached out to him and he was interested in my case. And then within 2 or 3 weeks, I was up there in his lab with him.
Gotcha. And how did the first day go in terms of like assessing you and figuring out like what you could or can't do?
It was it was 5 hours or so, very thorough examination where he asked me a lot of questions. He had me demonstrate a lot of movements. He picked out a lot of poor movement qualities and flaws in the way I would actually not just lift and pick up things off the ground and tie my shoes, but the way I would squat. I would actually work into my pain despite it. I deadlifted that way. I squatted that way. I bench pressed that way. So basically, he brought to my attention a lot of very, very simple things because I was looking for a cause or a solution that was way complicated, right? Everyone comes to see Dr. McGill and they want him to wave a magic wand over them and say, okay, you're healed, go and lift and enjoy it now. It isn't about that. It's simple advice, but simple doesn't mean easy. Simple does not mean easy. It's tedious. It's tedious to stabilize the core every day. It's tedious to go on 3 10-minute walks every day. And it's tedious to be able to give yourself permission not to lift for a while when that's what you do. So that's the hard part. So I basically had some tough love from him, and I had to wrap around my head even before I went in to see him that day that I was going to start over as a complete beginner. So whatever he said was the gospel. I wasn't going to argue, rebuttal, but the only thing that I was holding on to is that I was going to lift and compete and do well again. Everything else I was going to let him take complete control over. And he
Gotcha.
did. He did. He sorted me out quick. And within a couple hours of leaving the lab clinic training center, my pain had already ramped down a few notches. Within a couple of days, it ramped way down. And then within a couple of weeks to a month or so, I was almost completely pain-free. But because I was picking the scabs so much and so often, just little things that I did, moving better, using the squat, the lunge, or the golfer's pickup to do any movement, So we had the squat using the hips for something heavier. And we got the lunge for like tying your shoe. And then the golfers pick up something off the ground, and you can even lean on a tabletop or a chair to do that. Adding a lumbar support to my seats because I have a pretty big back and a nice curve. So it makes sitting dynamic now. So I'm sitting in this seat. I got a lumbar support here. I was pumping it up when we first got on this call. And I have one in my car. And if I travel on the airplane, I put it in there. And just the little things like that are tedious. They're simple, but they're not easy to do and stay committed to. I still do my core work every day. I still walk multiple 10-minute walks every day. I still move around my former pain causes and generators just because being a power lifter, I don't need a bunch of flexion. And being that was my former pain generator, I avoid it. I avoid it day-to-day life. I avoid it in the gym. I try to keep nice and clean form when I'm deadlifting heavy. So I've stayed with all this stuff and just built more and more capacity. And I have, a great deal more capacity now, 6.5 years later, than I did even a year after, or 2 years after, or 3 years after. Even when I was breaking those records, I'm still healing up consistently as the area toughens up and grizzles up and basically remodels.
Gotcha. And how did that work? Like when you went to visit him, did you just kind of like stay in a hotel or something, or an Airbnb for a while, and then just work with him for a couple of weeks? Or how long did that? I know it's ongoing. Obviously, you're doing this stuff every single day, but how long did the treatment process with him specifically last?
5 hours one day. That was it.
Oh, okay. So you didn't do any like follow-up appointments,
Not
and that
until
was
6 months later when we agreed upon me coming back up, and by then I was already lifting again. I've been pain free for a while, and I'd bought in 100%. So by that point, when he brought me back up, he was learning from me. He said, "Okay, so what'd you do to get from A to B? Okay, what'd you do from there?" Because in July, I sent him an email. We were out of the second phase of rehab. The first phase of rehab consisted of walking the Miguel Big Three, which is the bird dog, the side plank, and the modified curl up. I was doing carries, and I was just moving well every day. As soon as the pain wound down quite a bit, then I moved on to the next stage, which included goblet squats, kettlebell swings, different types of bottoms up carries and presses, as well as the McGill 3, as well as walks. And by July, I was completely pain free. So I sent him an email and said, "Hey, where do you want me to go from here?" And he said, "Brian, my job was to get you pain free. You're the strength expert. So I still want to know what you're doing so I can learn. But at this point, it's up to you to get yourself back." So when I went back a couple of months after that, a total of 6 months after the first visit, we collaborated for a plan and basically planned what you ended up seeing in Gift of Injury during that time. So yeah, it was a unique experience for sure. I'm eternally grateful that I hurt my back like I did, because I made great relationships with people, was able to write a really good book with the best low back expert in the world, and I've been able to help a lot of people, and that's very humbling to get messages and calls and emails from people every day, letting you know how it gave them hope, letting you know how it helped them see that the little things do matter, the minutia does matter. So that's all been a pretty cool process, kind of surreal.
Gotcha. And how long was the break in terms of you actually competing from like that severe injury to actually going back and seriously competing?
So I saw him in May. I got back to squatting heavy by that fall after I saw him in October again. And then I competed at the Arnold that following March, so another 6 months after that. But I wasn't quite ready. I still squatted good. I benched an all-time PR of 825. I squatted close to 1100, but my back still wasn't quite ready to deadlift, so I didn't even deadlift that day. So what I did is I reworked a few things. I dropped some body weight. I built more capacity with more carries, more walking, slimmed down about 20 pounds. And that was the missing piece. I was still just a little bit heavy. So by the fall of the following year, so October 2014, I finally put it back together and hit my biggest total ever. So about a year and a half, when I finally figured it out, I almost had it at about 11 months. So one of those things, consistently, constantly learning. I'm still learning. now after I'm, 6.5 years post injury. And I learned with the group of people that I train with in my garage every day. And I'm sure I'm going to continue to learn more and more about the back and the body and power and all that stuff until I'm done with it.
Gotcha. And do you have like any minor flare-ups from time to time? Because I know that could be a problem with low back sufferers as well. Like they're okay for 3 months, but then like they do something and then 1 week it's like messed up and then they're back to normal and then 3 months again. It's like an constant loop for a lot of people. Can you kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, but can you kind of go over your experience if you had that experience with those episodes?
The only time I had a flare up was that when I tried to come back too quick for that meet 10, 11 months after seeing Dr. Miguel. I haven't had a single flare up since. But I'm hyper vigilant with all my movement and any exercise that I pick. One of my talking points at seminars is every exercise has to have a specific purpose, and some tools are better than others for executing that. So I make people really, really uh, sort through the exercises and make sure it's the best exercise for them. And that's something I've been living the last 6.5 years, because all it takes is one stupid exercise or being a little bit loose under load or not being quite focused, and I could re-herniate a couple discs, or who knows, I could end up, picking the scab really bad if I let that happen over a period of time. So the movement patterns have been key, and building a core of iron has kept me from having flare-ups.
Cool. Outside of the like McGill big three movements you mentioned, what are some specific like core exercises that you found helped you in your progression?
So the McGill 3 and then versions of the McGill 3. I don't know if you've ever seen the square patterns with the bird dog.
Yep, where you kind of go off to the sides. Yeah.
So that ups the ante about 100% with that. I'll do fast rolling planks for neuromuscular facilitation, being quick, roll to the side, really quick, explosive, keeping the pelvis and the rib cage attached. Do power breathing on the side plank, curl up, different variations of the curl up and the dead bug. But another one that's very underrated is stir the pot. That's one of my go-to. People that are always coming to me, I want a six pack. Well, I'll meet them in the middle and say, okay, we got to train the core as a whole, the whole trunk. But here's your muscle where you can develop those frontal abs a little bit more. And the stir the pot's a great tool, and it's something that someone can get better at very quickly. I've had multiple people come and only be able to do 3 or 4 at a time. Within a couple of weeks, they're doing sets of 50 to 100 right away. But it's because they have no work capacity to start with. They think doing weighted sit-ups and leg raises is really working their core as a whole, and it's not. It's only isolating little pieces of it. And a lot of the EMG tests that you could research show that any kind of a sit-up is actually working your disc more than your ab muscles. So they catch on really quick. I really like bottoms-up carries for the core too. You go bottoms up from the suitcase, bottoms up overhead, and then you can do variations of walking backwards, marching, all that stuff. Sled drags, sled pulls, car pushes, and walking. Walking's great for the core. So I do that every day, multiple times a day. And of course, there's other advanced things. You can do heavy weighted good mornings, locking the torso in, heavy lifters wedge with an immovable force, put 1,000 pounds in the power rack and brace and root into the ground and build that core of iron while trying to move something that can't be moved. That's another good one too. But there's a lot of things. And with what I do, I have to get creative, because once I get past the basic, being healthy again, and I'm trying to get to ultimate world-class performance, you got to think outside the box a little bit. Unfortunately, I think that's what got me hurt in the first place. But also, it's how we grow and learn more. So it's a give and take.
And you mentioned the lifter's wedge. Many people might not be familiar with what that means. Can you kind of describe it in a little bit more detail?
Sure. So the lifter's wedge is the position of power that you want to be in when you're squatting, when you're deadlifting, and hell, even when you're benching. It's posting the pecs down, the lats down. You're squeezing the rhomboids in an anti-shrug manner. You're trying to physically bend the bar with your lats. You have white knuckles squeezing the bar super hard, and your core is stiff, pushing out laterally. And you have no soft spots in your entire, from your glutes all the way up to your traps. Front to pecs, abs, obliques, everything hard as a rock. and you try to be immovable and locked in. And that's the position with the neutral spine that we try to assume and remain in when we're squatting and deadlifting. And benching ends up being the same thing too. You're just lying on your back, trying to
Gotcha.
bend that bar and really squeeze it and engage the whole body instead of the upper body. People, when I set someone up on the bench, they have preconceived ideas of the bench press being an upper body, a pec, a shoulder, maybe a little bit of lat movement. But then I tell them it's absolutely a full body bench, a full body movement. And then I set them up. I put their feet out in front of them. I get them to arch their back a little bit. I get them to grab the bar and bend it, drive their heels. And next thing you know, it's harder for them than squatting on their hips, on their legs, on their back. So definitely the lifter's wedge, when mastered, is a big key to all those lifts, because we've seen people, they get loose and they're folding over on the squat, they're folding over on the deadlift, they're like a fish out of water on the bench press. So you got to solidify that lifter's wedge, and that's how we coach it, by posting down and locking in, gripping the floor like a monkey grabbing a tree branch and just locking in from the ground all the way up.
What's your take? I mean, you've been a coach for so many years already. What's your take on, and the deadlift and the squat have become like more popular exercises, but what's your take on just like the general average, for instance, office worker doing those lifts without instruction? Like, in my opinion, personally, I think you should have like thorough instruction in at least those two lifts or compound lifts before doing them. But what's your take on just the general population going in and just doing them out of nowhere without like that great of instruction and just trying to learn it themselves, basically?
It keeps me in business, and I don't want to see people get their back hurt, but there's no shortage. It's overflowing. People hurt their back so often. Ideally, in a perfect world, you'd make sure that if they're coming in to squat, bench, or deadlift, if they're not ready, they'd regress. They do a kettlebell, they do dumbbells, they do push-ups. They'd stay. If I'll have someone come into my lab, and if they can't stand on one leg for 15 seconds, they don't deserve to squat. They're not ready. They don't have the mind-muscle connection to squat properly. So some people that don't really have a great gift for athletic ability, they can still build it, but that isn't always going to be the best tool for them. It really depends on their goals and their configurations, and how blessed they are by their parents, and it really just depends. But I do think it's a good idea for just about everyone to have a variation of the squat, the bench, and the deadlift and overhead press in their training. But I don't like to give absolutes, but a version of it, whether it's a goblet squat or a front squat or a kettlebell or dumbbell squat or a belt squat, some kind of deadlift with kettlebells and some kind of carry, and then some kind of pressing to build those muscles that you may need, in everyday life. Overhead pressing, picking something up over your head. But definitely has to be catered to their limitations too. If someone's had 5 shoulder operations, and they're not trying to be a competitive lifter, you might not want to be overhead pressing them and bench pressing them that heavy. And for that matter, squatting them too, because it's going to put a lot of stress on that shoulder. But yeah, I definitely think that in an ideal world, you wouldn't have the general population walking in there after watching a YouTube video and seeing their favorite, lifter lift 800 pounds, and they're going in with no idea, no kind of core stiffness, no kind of body control, no kind of idea of how to release their hips and keep a torso of iron. So a lot of people make it look really easy, but the lifts aren't that easy. They're not easy to master, and it takes a long time to do that.
What's your take on like where bodybuilding fits into the world of lower back pain?
Bodybuilding fitting in what context?
It's stressed more to use, like, for instance, they do obviously compound movements with free weights, but there's a tremendous amount of machines in the programs as well, or a tremendous
Yeah.
amount of like isolating the muscle group, that kind of like philosophy towards training.
Yeah, so I got you. So I think that sometimes it ends up causing more injuries, being on isolation movements and sitting down when you could be standing up. And instead of, rowing on a machine, you're not bracing your core and doing barbell rows or kettlebell rows or dumbbell rows, or whatever it may be. I think I've seen a lot of bodybuilders that are dysfunctional. They have a great looking six pack, but because of the way they train, it's for aesthetics and not performance. They end up having a very weak and poor endurance, having lower back. So as far as how it could help, I don't really know, how bodybuilding could help with low back pain, but I've seen the way that a lot of these guys train, and they have to go into failure and fatigue to do that. And we know what happens when you go into failure and fatigue. You resort to any kind of form you can, because you gotta for hypertrophy, you have to stimulate those muscles. It's different than strength training. So you end up having a lot of sloppy form, and Ronnie Coleman comes to mind. He's as strong as an ox, but if you watch him barbell row in 495, it's very sloppy. If you watch him deadlift, he's very stiff-legged and rounded over. So I've definitely met a lot of bodybuilders that have hurt themselves because they don't do a great deal of multi-joint movements that are going to build a core of iron. They end up doing a lot more sit-ups than they would stir the pot, and vice versa. But as far as bodybuilding and back injury as a whole, that's not really my area of expertise. But I do know that people, when they're rehabbing their back, they need to forget the bodybuilding and work on building a core of iron, not doing pump up stuff for their arms and their legs and their pecs. So you have to separate it. If you're a bodybuilder, you got to get away from all that stuff. You've got to do things that are going to make your back stiffer and more resilient. And then eventually you get back into a later phase of doing the bodybuilding and reps. But for my background, I don't like high rep sets. It's impossible to keep perfect form with a set of 20 on the squat and the deadlift. And that's why you have so many people get hurt in CrossFit. The first 5 reps might be good. The next 5 reps may be okay. And the last 5 are absolutely terrible. And unfortunately, you create engrams that your body defaults to. And you don't want to muddy up those engrams by using poor form. So there's a lot of contradictions between bodybuilding and powerlifting. But I do think for a good routine, post rehab, some bodybuilding stuff to make sure you're hitting those smaller muscles, but it's all about those multi-joint big movements that will help make you strong and resilient. So sorry, that kind of a roundabout answer, but I just gave you what came to mind for that.
No, it's very, very good input. What's your take on kind of isolated lower back exercises, like the 45-degree lower back extension, for instance, and where that fits
Or
into the
reverse
bigger...
hyper?
Yeah, exactly. And where that fits into the bigger picture.
Some people feel that it helps their back. Let's say they have a disc bulge, L4, L5, L5S1. It didn't help me. It just flared me up. I had about 20 minutes of relief where it felt better, where it quote unquote loosened it up a little bit. And then it came back and grabbed even tighter. And what we know now is I was picking the scab. I was tapping into the stretch receptors of the spine that have a feel-good moment when you do a stretch or a hyperextension, and then it just comes back with a vengeance. So I haven't done a great deal. I don't prescribe a great deal of 45-degree hypers or reverse hypers, but I'm not going to argue with someone if they feel that the reverse hyper helps them, then great. I don't know everything, but just be cautious. If you do have mechanisms that cause your injury that mimic the reverse hyper or a hyperextension, I would avoid those. So that's my thought with it. With that said, I do like glute ham raises because that focuses on the hamstring and not so much the glutes and the low back and the erectors. But I like glute ham raises. I like good mornings. And if those aren't done right, they can end up hurting your back too. But directly, some people do use good mornings for rehab. I don't suggest it. I suggest it for later on when you're getting back to performance. But hey, some people use it for rehab too and keep the torso locked in and, get a good range of motion and come back and build more stiffness. But man, there's so many different ways to go about it. But I would be careful with those hyperextensions, especially if you're extension intolerant. And then with the reverse hyper swinging under, it comes into flexion a little bit. I would just be careful. Now, someone who just has a tight back that doesn't have a disc and they want to do it and they feel that it builds their glutes up and builds their lower back up, then if it's not hurting you, then I don't see a problem with it.
Do you believe like ART and like a good massage therapy helps you with, or do you even use those for your low back? to help prevent like future injuries, for instance?
I don't see much evidence that massage, soft tissue work, acupuncture, acupressure, ultrasound, any of those modalities that I use everywhere else every week, TENS unit, I have not seen any evidence to show that it'll help a disc flared up. What you end up doing a lot of the time is treating the symptoms. So let's say your glute's tight. Oh, your piriformis is messed up. Oh, you do have back pain. You probably have some sciatic pain coming from the sciatic nerve root. So, but again, you'd have to assess you. With that said, besides the lower back specifically, maybe sometimes people can have a little bit of tightness, a little bit of stiffness. It gets alleviated from some soft tissue treatment. That's great. From an adjustment, some people say that they're out, they get pushed down on the table and they feel better. That's great, but I would just proceed with caution with any of that because it could end up flaring that nerve up really bad if it is coming from the back. But ultrasound, TENS, all that stuff everywhere else, I get it done on my pecs often, my bicep tendons, my tricep tendons, my quads, my knees. So I love those modalities everywhere else. But what I've learned, it's best to leave the lower back alone. If you're a little bit tight, go for a walk. Lay on your stomach for 5 minutes. There's little things that I've found that help me more and don't just provide temporary relief, if that makes sense.
Gotcha. And kind of rewinding back a little bit to certain movements, do you have like any of your clients do any like core work on the decline bench?
Like a decline sit-up?
Yeah, like a
Anything?
decline sit up or a twist, for instance, or any of that stuff. Because I
No.
know a
And
lot of
there's
those
been,
are, yeah, go ahead. Didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
no, you're good. Go ahead.
Yeah, a lot of times those exercises are prescribed because I feel they do make your abs visually more attractive, like
For
visually more
sure.
healthy looking. But a lot of people don't kind of take into consideration the amount of pressure it's put on the discs, which every single one of those reps, and you're kind of carrying your whole entire body weight,
Hmm.
with every rep. And I have trouble talking some of my clients out of it. They're like, oh, but my abs look like so good when I was doing those. But then I'm like, oh man, but your back's not feeling too great. They're like, I don't care as long as
Yeah.
my abs look good. I'm like, well, your pain hasn't been good enough yet, if you're that
Right.
mindset. But
So there's a
what's
lot
your
of
tip?
variables there. When they say something like that, I'll ask them how does their diet compare now to when their abs were out like they were. So I get it. At the end of the day, the client's paying you to for your time, and you gotta sometimes meet them in the middle a little bit. So there's a bunch of different things. So if someone wants to sit down in a machine, which I don't have in the gym out here, it's all free weight. Let's say I had a client that I was training in a health club that wanted to sit down and overhead press. If that's what they want to do, I'll tell them my thoughts and then we can proceed ahead. Hey, I think you'll get a little bit more core stimulation standing. Pressing overhead will teach you better balance. I think it'll work your deltoids better, but we can do the machine press. If you want to do a couple decline sit-ups, here's the evidence. Do you still want to do them? Here's stir the pot. Stir the pot would be better. Dead bugs would be better. Miguel curl-ups would be better. Ball slams would be better. But hey, if you want to do those, we can do them. But just know, here's the evidence. That's how I hurt my back, by grabbing an 80-pound dumbbell and doing heavy sit-ups with it, thinking I was helping my back, doing reverse hypers, thinking I was helping my back. So at the end of the day, you can't help everybody, and I would rather have 95% of their program being really good for them and maybe 5% throwing them a bone every once in a while, than leaving and going somewhere else and only 50% of the stuff they're doing being good for them. So I guess everything is a negotiation at the end of the day. So sometimes if someone is really hell bent on doing something like that, I'll tell them my thoughts and then let them do it. And maybe they realize it, maybe they don't. I don't know. Some people are really quirky.
Gotcha. I guess like two last questions before we kind of close up. Like, what's your take on, like, say, like an average person comes into you and they're sitting like 8 to 10 hours a day? Like, what do you do to kind of like help them, I guess, get away from that? Because I'm guessing like that much sitting per day, there's no amount of exercise or corrective movements that can kind of help them recover from that. At least
Yeah.
I've noticed.
Are they in back pain or not?
let's just say like they do have back pain. It's kind of like
Okay.
not severe, but like annoying.
Okay, and they're a little sitting intolerant. What I prescribe is, of course, the walks throughout the day, but not sitting any longer than they can tolerate. So if they can only sit for 30 minutes at a time before they start getting stiff and flaring up, then every 29 minutes they get up and they walk to the water fountain and get a drink. And then they build that up to where they can sit for 35 minutes, 45, an hour. But I want them getting up regardless every hour at least, just for 2 minutes and going for a walk to the water fountain or to the bathroom. And then eventually you'll build the capacity where you can sit for a couple hours at a time and not have any setbacks. Also, I have them get out of their chair and do a couple bird dogs every once in a while. Maybe lay on their stomach. Now, they might like the stacked fists or one fist or hands flat. Everyone's going to be a little bit different depending on their injury and their body and the way it responds to that position. But definitely making sitting dynamic with the lumbar is a big one too. Because when I come in the morning, some days I need to pump this up a lot. Some days I don't need to pump it up at all, and it changes all throughout the day. So that already takes away a lot of the problematic issues with sitting. But it doesn't cure everything. You still need to get up and walk around and use nature's back balm, the walking, to naturally traction your spine. Lay down on your stomach for a little while. Do a couple bird dogs, a couple planks. Build some acute stiffness, and then go about your business. But it's like that perfect recipe. Everyone's going to be a little bit different. Some people can't walk for very long. Some people can't sit for very long. So you got to get creative at the end of the day, and then that's definitely like solving a puzzle.
Yeah, and you kind of mentioned, the like tremendous amount of variability in back pain from person to person. So what's your take now, kind of being more of an expert status on low back disorders, and with your experience of overcoming that, when you kind of like go online and you see like, just do this one thing and your low back will disappear. That's like 99% of articles on low back pain online.
Well, there's two different types of articles that I see. One is a direct ripoff of Stu's material, which is flattering. At least it's good material, but it's a direct copy paste from his back mechanic book. I see that pretty often, and then people don't give proper due credit to him, so that pisses me off. And then the other one is the marketing gimmicky crap. Do this one move to cure lower back pain. Roll on a lacrosse ball on the piriformis, and that'll cure your pain. Stretch, do the Spider-Man this, do that. So seeing all that definitely frustrates me because, again, it dilutes the good information out there, but at the same time, it will keep people hurt, and they'll come looking for Stu or me or one of the other certified practitioners or master clinicians out there to get them sorted out. But it's very frustrating to see the information out there either bastardized and not properly giving the credit, or just flat out made up stuff that has not been shown to help anybody. So it's tough. It's tough seeing that stuff. And I just try to do my part by putting good content out there, not being a marketing gimmicky person. I have people that message me every day asking me questions, and I tell them I can't do you a disservice by giving you a 2-sentence answer online because it's way more complicated than that. And I need a lot more information. So I'll get on a Skype with them like I'm doing with you right now, and we'll talk about it, and I'll do my best to help them.
Gotcha. Cool. Do you have like any closing statements before we call it a day?
Well, thanks for having me on first. I am grateful to be in this position where I can help other people. I take a lot of pride in my work and my coaching and the book that I wrote with Dr. Miguel, Gift of Injury, and my other training book, in 20 Life. For more information about me, you can find me at poweractstrength.com. That's my website with a bunch of strength and rehab content on there. But anyone has questions, you can reach out to me, contact me on the site. And I think that's about it, man. It's good talking with you, and it's been my pleasure.
Cool. And for the listener, I'll include all of Brian's links and contact info in the description section, so that way they can kind of easily get a hold of you. So thanks again for being a guest. Your story was inspiring to me. Helped me get out of my lower back discomfort and whatnot. So I appreciate your time and everything. Thank you.
Thank you. That's why we did it. Exactly that.
Thanks, Brian.